Hi, everyone. This is Reed at the Wisconsin Elections Commission. We'll be getting started here in just a minute or so to give people a chance to get into the room. Well, why don't we go ahead?
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Meagan Wolfe, the state of Wisconsin's chief election official and the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. So thanks for joining again today. We wanted to provide a few updates on the election process in Wisconsin. I'm committed to providing our state and country with the facts about how Wisconsin elections work. Elections must be transparent. Every step of our elections is transparent, from election day to the tally of absentees to certification. I believe that the planning, preparation, and addressing voter questions should be too. I take voter questions about the election very seriously. Election law is complex. It's our job as election administrators to not just understand and implement the law with precision, but it's also our job to explain the nuances of elections to the public in a way that's approachable. As election administrators, we don't write the law. We can't change the law, the process. That can only be done by your elected lawmakers. As election administrators, we're the referees. We have to follow the rules prescribed by those you elect, and we have an obligation to show you how we are doing that. So to that end, I wanted to answer questions that we've been receiving in our office the last few days and to provide you with updates. Namely, let's discuss the unofficial turnout numbers, election day registration, and the mechanics of a recount. We have also put out a press release with this information and encourage you to share the facts with others who may have questions or concerns about the elections process. So when it comes to voter turnout, unofficially, Wisconsin voters cast 3,296,374 votes for president. That is the most ever in the state of Wisconsin, exceeding the previous record of 3,071,434 set in 2012. That makes the unofficial turnout percentage of Wisconsin, which has a voting age population of 4,536,417 voters. The unofficial turnout percentage of that is 72.67%. Now, it's important to note, and I've heard many questions about this, that some jurisdictions choose to report their unofficial turnout as a percentage of registered voters. So for example, if a city has 100,000 registered voters as they head into the election, 10,000 new voters register using election day registration, those jurisdictions will sometimes report 110% turnout. The state reports turnout as percentage, again, of eligible voting population, which is that unofficial 72.65% of Wisconsin's 4.53 million eligible voters. So I think that's an important distinction because, again, these are unofficial results and different jurisdictions are using different equations to come up with that percentage of unofficial voter turnout. But we use eligible voter population to make our unofficial determinations. By law, the state of Wisconsin, again, has election day registration. This means that voters who may not have registered previously can register to vote on election day. This increases the number of voter registrations. When voters register on election day, they have to provide personally identifiable information and a proof of residence document. Their address is also verified by sending them a mailing. The local election officials are now in the process of certifying the election at the municipal, county, and then state level. Part of that process is double checking that every voter participation entered has a corresponding and valid voter registration. So, in short, I'm so proud of Wisconsin's voters, not just for the record numbers in which they turned out to participate, but for the peaceful and civil way that they did so. And I'm also proud of our local election officials and our poll workers. They followed the law. They were incredibly professional despite enormous pressure. The next question I'd like to address is, did my vote count? Many voters are visiting our My Vote Wisconsin website to check their records. As allowed by state law, it can take up to 45 days for local clerks to record paper registrations into the electronic system. So please do not worry if you don't see your participation recorded right away. Your local election official is entering it and is double checking everything as part of the canvass and the certification process right now. If you voted by absentee in the state of Wisconsin, you can track your ballot on Wisconsin's website, myvote.wi.gov. You can see that it was received, but you won't see if it was counted and recorded as part of your voter participation record until after the canvass and certification has been completed. And again, state law explicitly spells out that our local election officials have up to 45 days to complete this process. All of the data as part of the election is required to be made available, and the paper artifacts of an election are always required to be maintained as part of the document's retention laws. Next, a reminder to all of us to continue to seek out official facts about elections. Please don't help to perpetuate rumors. I know everyone is very passionate, as they should be, about the election, but we have an obligation to engage with the facts. I understand that your right to vote is sacred, and there's a very robust system that protects your vote and makes sure that only valid ballots can be counted. Wisconsin voters and people across the country have questions about how Wisconsin's unofficial election results are reported because of the closeness of the results and the time it took for some of our municipal clerks to complete the counting of absentee ballots. The answer to this question is because we followed the law. And the law says that absentee ballots have to be received by 8 p.m. on election day to be counted. And counting can't begin until the polls open at 7 a.m. on election day. The law further says that every valid ballot has to be counted. There's no cutoff time. And with almost 2 million absentee ballots that had to be counted, election officials took the time necessary to count each ballot in accordance with the very specific requirements of the law. And I'll repeat this point again because I think it is so important. Every step of the election process is publicly observable and is transparent. This includes voting at the polls on election day and the counting of absentees. It also includes the canvass and certification of the tally that is happening right now in municipalities and counties across the state. Every ballot cast in the state of Wisconsin has a paper audit trail. Every voter registration and absentee request is maintained and available during that public process. And to address some of the questions head on, Wisconsin does not have more votes cast than registered voters. There were no absentee ballots found in the middle of the night. There were lawyers and observers from both parties on site and involved the entire time. That even includes at 4 a.m. When ballots were still being counted and those unofficial totals were being posted. Clerks followed the law and they counted every ballot until they were done. I think it's also worth noting, and we talked about this yesterday, that in Wisconsin, there are 39 municipalities, including many of Wisconsin's largest cities, that use the process outlined in law known as central count to count absentee ballots. This process is where all absentee ballots are counted at a central location rather than at each individual polling place. In these jurisdictions, you will see results from polling places posted while central count ballots are still being tallied. Only when central count is complete and every valid absentee ballot has been counted can they post the central count numbers. This is why you're going to see a spike in ballots reported late in the process. Again, central count is publicly observable, and representatives from both parties observe the tally of these ballots, including the verification of the results that were posted on election night and into Wednesday morning. And the last topic I'd like to cover is recounts. According to the unofficial results gathered from our 72 county clerks' websites, the margin of victory between the top two presidential candidates is 20,470 votes, or 0.62%. And that makes that race eligible for a recount. Because the margin is more than 0.25%, the requesting candidate must prepay the estimated costs at the time of filing a recount, if one were to be filed. A candidate cannot request a recount until after the last county has reported its certified results to the state. The deadline for certified results is November 17th. And for presidential recounts, the candidate has just 1 day to file for a recount. And I have to apologize too. Yesterday, I misspoke. The Wisconsin legislature changed this deadline from 3 days to 1 following the 2016 presidential recount. If a recount is filed, we would provide a cost estimate, and the candidate would be required to pay the estimated cost upon filing. Once this happened, the Wisconsin Elections Commission would then order a recount. From there, the county election officials would have essentially 13 days to complete the recount and to submit the certified recount results to the commission. The commission would then certify the election based on the results of the recount. So while no recount has been requested at this point, our office is always preparing. So right now we're actively preparing for that possibility, and we're going to continue to coordinate with Wisconsin's 72 counties and clerks who would be primarily responsible in the event of a recount. So I think that covers everything we wanted to address today, in making sure that we were, again, addressing head on any of the questions and concerns about the process, because again, I think that we as election officials have an obligation to make sure that voters' concerns are addressed and that they have facts to answer their questions about how elections work in the state of Wisconsin. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Reed, and we'll ask for any questions.
Thanks, Megan. And before we start with the questions, I just want to let you all know that I am sorry that if I have not gotten back to you, if you have emailed me or called me in the last 24 hours. I'm working my way through the stack, but there's just an awful lot of them. So I will get back to you as soon as I can. So for questions, first we have Cinnamon Janzer, after which it'll be Pat Pabletti.
Can you hear me?
Again.
Yes.
Okay, great. I have two questions. One is, I know that Milwaukee County is doing their canvassing, has started their canvassing this morning, which is at the same time as the municipalities. Do you have a sense of how many counties usually tend to start at the same time versus waiting for their municipalities? And then the second question is, if you could add any other details about how the Wisconsin Elections Commission is preparing for the recount, or a possible recount.
Thank you very much for those questions. So, those would be about the canvass process and the noticing process. Again, that is a process established by each of our 1,850 cities, towns, and villages, and each of our 72 counties. And so they have to publicly post those notices. They don't report those notices to our office. So that's a process that's completely conducted by the municipalities and by the counties themselves. And so they would be the best source for that information. And then in terms of details about the recount, we're always preparing for anything that might come our way. 2020 has been the year where I think we've seen everything that can happen in election administration come our way, and we needed to prepare for that. So that being said, I think just laying out the timeline, making sure we understand exactly what that timeline is, especially since the law did change a little since 2016. one of those tasks that would be on that list is estimating cost. So working with our local election officials to find out what their estimated costs would be, to make sure that we're covering all the categories that might potentially come up with costs. There's things we'll probably have to figure in terms of, making sure they have large enough spaces to accomplish social distancing, things that we didn't have as part of the list in 2016. The law changed also so that our office can also ask for costs associated with us assisting with the recount. And so that's probably the other piece that we're working on now too, is to understand how we would collect that information and try to get as accurate as we could. I think looking back at 2016, we have some very recent experience with this and a lot that we can build off of.
All right, next is Pat, followed by Mary Spacuzza.
Thanks, Megan, again for doing these. So you kind of touched on where my question was going, but I was curious to know if you guys have any sense of what the cost is going to look like yet, and if not, do you remember what the cost was in 2016, and can you roughly ballpark how much additional cost it would be when you factor in your office's costs as well?
Yeah, I really don't care to speculate ever about, things like that, because that's work we need to do to make sure that we understand what those costs would be. All of the information from 2016 is posted to our website, so you can find our cost estimates. You can also find what the final actual costs were in the categories. But again, we're right now thinking through what are those other categories that might be different from 2016 and now. And, one of them that came to mind for me was things like renting larger spaces, the potential for things like live stream of the recount, because there might be limitations on how many observers can safely be there. You can't really be looking over someone's shoulder like maybe they were able to in 2016. So I think there will be some differences, but I think if you look back at that data from 2016, you'll see a pretty good foundation that we can now build upon to get more accurate estimates.
And if I could follow up that real quickly on the mechanisms on the prepaying of the recount, how does that work? Do they make a payment directly to you based on your estimate, and then you guys authorize the counties to go and begin the count? Is that roughly how it works?
Yes, so with the filing, they would have to submit payment to our office by the deadline. And then upon receiving the filing and the prepayment, the commission would then authorize the recount to start. And then from there, I believe that the counties have 3 days to sort of put the process into to start working on that.
Thank you.
All right, next is Mary, followed by Dakota.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. The Trump campaign raised concerns about irregularities in several Wisconsin counties, and today in a media call said magical sacks of ballots were being found overnight. We're just trying to check and see, have any formal complaints or any specific concerns been raised to your agency about anything like this?
Thanks for that question. So no, we have not received any report of any irregularities. And again, I know that there were questions, and again, I take those questions seriously. When people see that concerning a spike that concerned them, at night in those ballot totals being posted, that's because of central count and all the absentees coming in at night. They all had to be counted until they were finished, and then they all have to be reported at once. And so that's where you're going to see some of those spikes. So beyond that, no, there's been no problems reported to our office, no complaints filed with our office on any irregularities.
Thank you.
Dakota, you're next, followed by Hannah.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I just wanted to ask, since absentee voting is pretty new for most people this year, and the president himself has kind of raised concerns over their validity, can you go into a little bit more, how these ballots are certified and checked to make sure they are accurate?
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I love those types of mechanical questions about the process. So let me give this a try from the start. So first, a voter has to be registered to vote. So before you can request an absentee ballot, you have to be registered. When you register, You are affirming that you are an eligible voter of the state of Wisconsin. You are providing personally identifiable information. You're providing a proof of residence document or matching all your data fields with the DMV. So registration is where you verify that you are you and that we verify that you are you and we put you into the system. There's maintenance that goes on all the time. So if somebody becomes ineligible, so let's say they become a felon or they're deceased, they're deactivated from that registration system. And that happens every day where we keep up with those registration records. So I think that is a really important piece of this. You've got to be registered, and a lot goes into registration before you can request an absentee ballot. Then if you want to request an absentee ballot, in the state of Wisconsin, all voters have 3 options for casting their ballot: absentee by mail, in-person absentee, or at the polls on election day. If you choose absentee by mail, then you have to make a request. And when you make your request for an absentee ballot, you have to provide information to your local election official so that they can find your voter registration record, make sure that you're lawfully registered to vote. Then you also have to provide a photo ID, and that's kept on file as part of your record for that absentee process as well. From there, each municipality has a clerk. So we have 1,850 cities, towns, and villages that are responsible for registering voters, for issuing absentees. So when your request goes, it goes to a person. It goes to a person in your community that is checking to make sure you're lawfully registered to vote, making sure you provided all the information, the photo ID, checking all the requirements. And then from there, they very intentionally make the decision if you're eligible to get an absentee ballot. And if you are sent an absentee ballot. From there, the voter can cast their ballot by absentee in the presence of a witness. And the voter has to sign the certification on it's an absentee envelope. And they also have to have their witness sign and also include their address. From there, your ballot is sent back to the clerk. I should also say during that transmission process, we also have intelligent mail barcodes on that mail process so that you can track your absentee ballot, so that we in our system can take a look to make sure that everything's reaching the milestones that it should. And if it's not, we can work with that voter to make sure they get a replacement ballot as well. When the local election official receives your ballot, they have to first check it into the system that it's been received, right? And all of that information is in the system as part of your record. So if you sent a second absentee request, the clerk again has to make sure you're registered. And they're also going to see, oh, this person already has an absentee request on file. And all that information is also populated to the poll book. So on election day, if you go in to vote in person and you've already received and returned your absentee ballot, you wouldn't be eligible to cast a ballot at the polls on election day. So it's all a coordinated system, not just absentee, but it plays through to the paper poll books even at the polls on election day. Then on election day, your absentee ballot is either sent to your polling place or it's sent to a central count location where you're assigned a voter number, just like if you were there on election day. Your name and your address are publicly announced. People have an opportunity to challenge ballots if they have firsthand information that that voter is not eligible. Then the election inspector is going to go through that certification and make sure that you filled everything out. Before the ballots are even sent down, again, they have to check the registration record, make sure you're still eligible to cast your ballot. If something changed since you received it to them getting back, they wouldn't count that ballot or send it down to be counted. And then at the polls, again, they're going to check that certification, make sure everything is good to go. If there's missing information, that ballot can't be counted. And then that ballot is tabulated. But your certificate envelope, your registration form, your absentee request, those are all kept and maintained again by your local election official. So in the event of a recount, if we were to have one, those are materials they have to maintain and go back to again, double check that everything happened how it should.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next is Sean Gallagher, followed by Kia Murray.
Hey, Megan, thanks for doing this. I had a question about provisional ballots. I know, I think it was yesterday, you guys mentioned in a typical race, maybe you have 1,000 or so across the state. Are you getting those numbers back and expect them to be higher? And how could that impact the election?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the state of Wisconsin, not to get into the weeds, I love to get into the weeds of elections, but we don't have a lot of provisionals because we are exempt from the National Voter Registration Act. So long story short, there's really only one scenario where you can be issued an absentee ballot in Wisconsin. Other states, there's a lot more. But in
Provisional ballot.
Wisconsin, it's only if you've had, you don't have the valid photo ID that you need to vote at the polls on election day. There's also a provision if you don't have or are unwilling or unable to provide your driver license or ID number when you're registering to vote. So, very limited opportunities. But we pulled the numbers recently to see what the clerks had entered. And Reed, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was around 900 that are issued. So a small amount. And again, those voters have until Friday at 4 p.m. to bring back the deficient information and have their ballot counted, but it's a very small amount.
And I know you said missing information on ballots and some other things would kind of nullify, not have that ballot counted. Any idea numbers on that?
So last we checked, and this was prior to the election, so we'll have all of the reconciled data. Any of this data I'm giving you, please, it's unofficial. But the unofficial data before the election, so clerks that had looked at the envelopes before they sent them down to the polls and put information into the statewide system. Because when clerks put the information into the statewide system, it can display for the voters. So they can flag for the voter if they missed providing their signature or their witness signature was missing. They can flag that for voters on our website. And we saw that there were less than 1,000 ballots that had been marked with some type of deficiency prior to election day. Those voters have since, had an opportunity to correct those problems. But if they weren't corrected by election day, then those ballots couldn't be counted. So again, a pretty low number, and Wisconsin typically in elections sees very low ballot rejection rates.
Yeah, I don't have any updated numbers from those, so, but I can check and send those out later. Next up is Kia.
Thank you for doing this, Megan. I apologize in advance. My question is pretty long here, but bear with me. I've got a source from the Trump campaign that says their legal volunteers actually saw poll workers, quote unquote, cure absentee ballot information in some kind of red pen or marker. And that was where poll workers and not voters either corrected or added information, and this was to the ballot itself. And they're claiming that this happened to at least 15 to 20% of absentee ballots, specifically in Milwaukee. And so I'm wondering, one, is that true? Two, if you could speak to this process of quote unquote curing ballots. I apologize because I'm not familiar with it.
Yep.
And is this normal and legal?
Well, thank you very much. I think that's a really important question. Now, I don't want to speculate, I wasn't myself there, but I can talk a little bit about what may have been occurring. There's so many things in elections that aren't familiar to people. And when they see them, they're not sure what's happening. And so we always work with our local election officials too, to make sure they're describing the process and that people know what they're doing and have an opportunity to weigh in or challenge the process as well. So I always think observers and challengers, important, good, healthy part of elections. So what might have been happening is, like you said, they might have been curing the ballot, where there could be a couple of scenarios. One could be, let's say a voter returned their absentee ballot and the witness signature or the witness address had been missing. They could alert that voter, and that voter could bring down their original witness and have the witness sign their information. Another option is they're also allowed to add the witness's address if that's missing. Now, if the witness's signature is missing and the witness doesn't come down, they can't cure that another way. But if the address is missing, and let's say, they got 2 ballots back from a husband and wife, and they could see that the person's address, was right there, they're able to add that address information, but certainly not the signature. Another thing that can possibly happen is, let's say an absentee ballot was issued during in-person absentee. So there are almost 700,000 in-person absentee ballots issued. And this happens in each of our local municipal clerk's office. And so if a ballot was issued in person, it still has to have a witness, but that's going to be the clerk's staff. And so they have the clerk's office as the address for the witness, and then the staff that issued the ballot signs it. During in-person absentee, they're also issuing that in real time out of the statewide system. So they're able to go back in and see who issued that ballot, who witnessed that ballot. And in some cases, let's say that the witness missed signing it. again, they have an opportunity to come down and cure that on election day, to fill in the deficient information, but it has to be that original witness. And in the case of in-person absentee, they actually know definitively who that witness was because they can see that in the system.
Thank
So
you.
not to speculate, but I think those are just some of the things that could potentially happen.
And so just the other thing to add is that they're not curing the ballot itself with the person's votes on it. It's the certificate envelope that gets cured.
Great distinction. I'm sorry for not making that right. The certificate, those were all about the certificate envelope, not the ballot itself. There's also a remaking process, and this happened a lot in Outagamie County, where they had a small scratch on one of their timing marks. And the law also outlines a very specific process where there's going to be representatives from each party involved in this process, where they actually keep the original ballot and the remade ballot, and they can tie them back to each other to make sure it was done correctly. But the law allows, if there's a defective or a damaged ballot, that the election inspectors can remake the ballot so that it can be counted by the electronic voting equipment. But again, that's observed and conducted by members of both parties if available at that polling place. And also there's a distinguishing number on both the original and the remade ballots, so that in the event of a recount or any questions, that they're able to go back and verify that the remake was done properly.
Next is Amy Reed, followed by Savannah Tomei.
Hi, thank you. So we're seeing other states are still counting their ballots and may not have results today. Meanwhile, Wisconsin was able to count all of theirs and get results out. So I was wondering if you could just speak to how election officials handled this election and how it looks with Wisconsin being done with, of course, results unofficial, but with those being counted at this point while we are still waiting for some other states.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I have the utmost respect for election officials around our country. I know them personally, and we are really lucky to have all of them at the helm in our various states. And so each of us, though, have a different set of laws that we're working under. So Wisconsin has our Wisconsin state laws, and that outlines how we have to conduct our election. Each state in their state legislatures have come up with completely different laws in terms of how that process works. And so in some states, they have an extended return period. In Wisconsin, our ballots have to be back by 8 p.m. on election day to be counted. In other states, they have a week or sometimes more for ballots to continue to come back that were put in the mail on election day. So a lot of states also have things like provisional ballots, a lot more than we do, that they have to continue to count and process after election day. So I think the fact that it's taking longer in those states says nothing of the election official and is simply a construct of their laws.
I could just quickly follow up then. You mentioned how our laws stop us from accepting absentee ballots after 8 p.m. on election day. I was just wondering, are you guys going to be doing kind of an audit on absentee ballots that were received after election day and when that would be kind of coming out?
Yeah, so as our so all the data in our statewide database comes from our 1,850 local election officials. And so as they go through and record participation, so like I was talking about, when voters go in to see if their ballot was counted, clerks are working on recording participation. They also track things like ballots that were received after the deadline. So they're going to also enter in ballots that were rejected for missing witness, or they're going to count, or they're going to put in ballots that were received after 8 p.m. on election day and show that that ballot wasn't able to be counted. And so all of those are maintained and tracked, as part of the election materials as well. So that's data that's always available as part of our post-election data sets that we're required to put out, especially after a general or presidential election. There's things like federal reports that we have to complete that go into this really nuanced data about, what was counted and what was rejected.
Thank you.
Savannah is next, followed by Brett.
Hi, thank both of you for doing these. As always, I know you must be running on fumes here. There's been so much misinformation about every state in the country throughout election day and then in the days afterward. with Wisconsin, the big one was the number of ballots cast versus registered voters. We now know, of course, that that information is incorrect, but how does that impact you guys? Have you answered any calls from concerned people? How do we kind of fight that misinformation, and how does it impact our election system when there's doubt sown like that?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, there were a lot of calls. There certainly were a lot of calls to our office. I have an incredible staff, and they have been patient and helpful on all of those calls and helping people understand the mechanics of the elections. I really don't blame voters when they're confused or when they have questions about the process. I really think it is my job, my obligation as a public servant and as an election official to help explain the process and explain how it works. And so that's what we've been doing, is showing them how it works, pointing them to the information and to the data. And I think that the more people know about the process, they feel much better about it once they can see the facts. But sometimes, when you see that misinformation, and that's why I really wish people would check the facts, share things like our press release. I know it's not as flashy as maybe other things that you could share on social media, but, share the facts rather than speculation or rumors. Because once people know the facts and they know the mechanics, I think they understand the process. But I don't know that we're always as good as we should be about providing approachable information about the process to voters. And so, I won't lie, I was tired today. I wasn't sure I wanted to do another one of these, but I think it's really important for us to do all we can to get information out. And, for many of you that are on this call, we've been doing these calls every week for months now. And I think it's been really, really important and helpful in making sure we're getting good information out to voters. So I think you all play a really important role in this too, is just getting the facts out there. So we'll just keep doing that. We'll keep getting the facts out. We put a press release out today. We're doing things like this, talking to folks to make sure that they know where to go to get the facts and to understand how elections actually work.
Thanks, Megan.
All right, Brett is up next, and it's going to be followed by Ben Jordan.
Hi, Megan. Thanks for doing this. Two questions along the same line here. How long has that 45-day window been in place for voters to verify if they voted in person? And then what do you say to someone who did vote in person on election day? What do you say to them to reassure them that their vote was in fact counted? Because obviously it will be past the window to after the canvass for them to know that.
Right. And, there's actually not an opportunity to sort of correct voter participation at this point. So when they're, going through that double check, but the 45 days has been for a presidential election and recording election day registrations and participation information. It's been around as long as I believe our statewide voter registration database has been around. And that started with the Help America Vote Act funding, I believe in 2003 was the first version, or 2005 was the first version of our statewide system.
2006.
And so 2006. Okay. I wasn't there yet, but so I think that requirement of them being able to have time to take the paper process that is election day and turn it into electronic data has been around since the electronic system has been around. To those voters, I think one of the things is you can reach out to your local election official. They're working so hard right now to get that data in. Many of them hire additional people. They're also facing the potential of a recount, but they do have the poll book, right? They do have the poll book, and that's the information they use to put that information into the statewide system. So they are able to verify that for you at the local level as well. And in Wisconsin, you can find their contact information. Maybe shoot your local election official an email and ask them to verify for you so that they're able to take a look and get back to you. But, they're working to get that in as fast as they can, but they have all those records. They're just in paper form right now.
All right, next is Ben Jordan.
Hey, Megan. There was a lot of talk and concern about voter fraud ahead of this election. I recall the Wisconsin Elections Commission kind of sending a stern warning not to vote twice in this election, absentee and at the polls. Is there any evidence that that might have happened? If so, how many cases and where?
Thanks. So, we do an audit of the system after each election. And in a general election, we even do audits where we compare that data, not just against records in Wisconsin, but across the country to make sure that if somebody did vote twice, that they are prosecuted. And so we always have that information based on those audits from previous years available on our websites. And, we won't know that or be able to conduct the audit until participation has been entered into the statewide system. So again, those 45 days. But after that's done and everything's been reconciled is when that audit is run. And then after that is when we do the other comparisons. And then anybody, that we have evidence that committed a crime will be referred for prosecution. And you can see all of those referrals from previous years posted publicly on our website. It's something we're required to do and that we're required to report to the legislature and to post publicly.
And I'll just add that the numbers are exceedingly small. And the warnings that we gave out beforehand were to make sure that people didn't try to come down and vote in person if they had already sent back their absentee ballot. There's a system in place to prevent anybody from voting twice, but we also just wanted to make sure that people understood what that system is. So it's not like that this happens very often or at all.
Yeah, great point. I think it was just absentee was new to so many people. We wanted to make sure that they understood the rules.
All right, next is Chuck from WKVT.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering who actually physically does the recount. Is it strictly the staff of the municipalities, or do they call in all the poll workers? Or since it's going to be so many more counting and done hand by hand, do they need more people to come in?
Yeah, so recounts for a statewide or federal contest, those are actually conducted by the counties. So our 72 counties conduct those for their municipalities, their respective municipalities. So there's 1,850 municipalities, 72 counties. And in the event of a recount, it's those 72 counties that are running the show. A lot of them do bring in the chief inspectors and the clerks from those municipalities to help conduct the recount at the county. So that's usually how that works, but the counties are the ones that are doing that. And then, we work with them to make sure that we're reporting out. If you look back at 2016, we, reported out as those certifications from each individual reporting unit came in, and any net change that happened based on the recount numbers were posted on our website. But yeah, each of the counties is responsible for conducting that.
Chuck, you might want to talk to La Crosse County Clerk Ginny Dankmeyer about the recount process as well.
I would agree. She's great, and she really knows this process well.
All right, next is Adam Brewster from CBS, followed by Scott Bauer.
Hey, Megan, thanks for doing this again. You mentioned at the top, no recount has been filed or requested at this point, pretty clear. The Trump campaign yesterday said they had filed. Have they reached out to you in any capacity to suggest they have, or have you heard from them at all?
No, not specifically about a recount that I'm aware of. I mean, we certainly hear from the campaigns regularly, just as they're asking questions and navigating the process. We're always open and willing to provide them with any information. But no, I'm not aware that we've received any official communications about a recount.
All right, Scott Bauer.
Thanks, Megan, for doing this. That was actually my question. If you had been contacted by the Trump campaign, is it surprising to you that you haven't been asked about the rather Byzantine process of a recount at this point by them?
No. I mean, I never speculate. That's not my job ever, but I think that we have a lot of information about a recount. We have a recount manual, we have a memo and a manual for anything in elections. And so we have a lot of information about how a recount works. And we certainly answer any questions that come our way, but I don't know that I find it surprising that we haven't seen anything else at this point. I mean, they really can't make a request until after we have the certified canvases from the counties. So, I think that's also an important clarification, is now wouldn't be an appropriate time for them to file.
Next is Ellie Kaufman.
Hey, Megan, thanks so much for doing this. My one question is, what happened with the town of Willow? Why were their results delayed yesterday?
Well, I hope they're doing okay, and I didn't mean to send the whole nation their way, but yeah, they shortly thereafter, after we talked yesterday, they posted their unofficial results. So I think it was just a matter of communication. So that is now posted on Richland County's website, and you can see their 300 votes.
Thank you.
Adriana Diaz, followed by Alexa. Oh, where did Adriana go? I don't see her. Well, Alexa's next then.
Hi, Megan, I know someone asked you about this already, but I was curious when you think you might have some data on the number of ballots that are coming in after Election Day, after the deadline?
Yeah, so that won't be, there's no specific statutory requirements or deadline for when they have to enter that data. So it won't be until after they record participation, they get all their registrations in, they conduct a recount, that they'll then go through and record some of their other data. But we do have federal reports that we're required to file. So there's the EVES, the Election Administration, I'm not sure, it's through the US EAC. We all have to file federal reports about the data on the elections. And so after all of the jurisdictions have entered their data, we have the fun of getting to call 1,850 jurisdictions and just make sure all their numbers make sense. Most other states only have 50, election officials, but we have our 1,850. And so we work with all of them to make sure all their data has been entered, and then we submit our federal report. So that takes a while, but all that data will be available as part of that federal reporting requirement and other data sets that are available through things like our data system on Badger voters.
Thanks.
All right, next we've got Riley Vetterkind, and then I'll go back to the people who had previously asked.
Hi, Megan. Thanks for doing this call. I wanted to ask about absentee ballots and when we will know, can I have a final number or a reportable number on how many absentee ballots were actually counted in the election? Because it's my understanding that the counts that you guys generate each morning, I'm assuming some of those may have arrived late and not been counted. As kind of a follow-up to that, I'm also wondering when we will know how many absentee ballots were mailed but arrived after the election day and so weren't able to be counted.
Yeah, so in terms of the number that were returned and actually recorded as part of participation, that would be after the 45 days. So if there, let's say, was a voter who asked for an absentee ballot, they were sent one, but then they chose to go to the polls and vote on election day, that's going to get officially, recorded as part of that voter's official record. So the clerk would go in and say, this voter cast their ballot on election day, that's how they participated, but they were also sent an absentee ballot, which they didn't return. And so that would, show as spoiled because they then cast a ballot at the polls on election day. So that happens as part of that reconciliation and as part of recording participation. And we'll know that number in terms of participation that's actually counted from absentee around the 45 days is when we would have that data. In terms of ballots that were mailed back but received after the deadline, that's actually not a data point that our clerks have to record, but most of them do. And so again, once they're done recording participation, entering registrations, doing all the things that are required by law, they'll also go through and do things like, enter in information about ballots received that were received after the deadline. And there's a category that they can, record those so that the voter can see that information, and so that we have a record of that too. But all the materials of the election, so all of the ballots that are returned after Election Day still have to be maintained as part of the public records or the public records retention laws. And so those are available as part of the artifacts of the election. But long story short, that data wouldn't be available until after the 45 days because it's not required like other data points.
And when you say the 45-day mark, is that referring to those federal reports you were mentioning, or is that the state canvas, which I believe is sooner than that?
Yeah, thanks, Riley. So 45 days is the state law that have 45 days to record voter registrations and voter participation in the statewide database. So it actually outlines, when they have to do some of their data entry work. So again, taking the paper process that is Election Day and turning it into electronic records, they have 45 days to get that information into the system.
Okay. And then one last question on the recount. Is that a hand recount that's required, or will they be using machines if that ends up occurring?
Yeah, so the counties have discretion to make that decision. So the law does not specify how it has to be counted. So if we look back at 2016, some counties elected to do a hand recount, and others had their voting equipment reprogrammed to do a recount using their voting tabulators. So they do have some discretion to make that decision.
Okay, thank you.
And then I think Pat from WisPolitics had another question.
Hi, Megan. Had to unmute myself there. To pick back up on the thread of the Trump campaign and the issues they're raising about curing ballots in Milwaukee, they also indicated that some of the legal volunteers they had in Milwaukee were prevented from having what they say is meaningful access all the time. I know that's a question more for local officials than for you specifically, but did you hear anything along those same lines?
So yeah, you're right. I think this would be a great question for the local election officials. But one of the things that we have to remember as part of this election is we had to keep everybody safe. We had to keep voters and poll workers and observers safe. So polling places are required to have space for observers or an observer, but they can set a limit on how many can safely fit into the polling place. And so in some jurisdictions, maybe they could only allow 2 people to be in and still not exceed their capacity limits for social distancing with poll workers and voters. And if they did that, they were advised to make sure that each of the parties was able to have someone in there to observe. And they were also, advised that they should set up a schedule for rotation as well to make sure that people had opportunities to observe. And so that is certainly what happened in some of our jurisdictions. They had to keep everybody safe. And so, it might have meant that they couldn't cram 20 observers into an area like they could before, and they could only fit, 4. So each polling place had to make those determinations on how to keep everyone safe in accordance with law. The law also says that the observer table can be 3 to 8 feet away from things like the poll book or the registration table. And so, under public health guidance, those tables had to be at least 6, or those areas had to be at least 6 feet away to, again, make sure that everybody was able to stay safe.
Scott Bauer, do you have another question?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Let's see. Ellie, did you have another question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. I've been slow on lowering people's hands after they're done. Kia, did you have another question?
Yeah, just a clarification. So before you said that there would only be this curing process to the outer envelope where, you'd find the signatures, addresses, and those kinds of things. There wouldn't be a situation then where you'd have to cure a ballot or add information to the ballot itself where people actually circle in who they're choosing.
No, right, correct. You would not make a change to an actual ballot. There's a remaking ballot process like we discussed for a damaged ballot or a defective ballot. where they remake the ballot and then they keep the original and the remade ballot that can be paired back together if needed. But no, beyond that, there's no reason why they would be making any marks on the actual ballot itself. Now, there was Outagamie County, where there was a discussion certainly heading into the election about filling in the timing mark so those ballots could be tabulated on the optical scan equipment. But the court said that they could not do that process, and instead they had to remake those ballots. So that's what they did.
And the only other thing is that sometimes there will questions will come up about voter intent. Sometimes instead of filling in the oval, people will like draw a circle around an oval, or there will be stray marks. But in those cases, those are decisions that are made by the representatives from each party. They work together. They sort all those issues out in a public way. Nobody's just going and changing things or fixing things.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Oh, really?
All right. And so there was one, Bridget Fargan had typed in a question just about the difference between municipalities holding all of their results to release at once versus the central count. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the law says that you can't post a reporting unit until it's complete. The exception is central count. But so, if a polling place is sending back their results, they can't do that until it's complete. And in some jurisdictions, they're sending those polling place unofficial results to their counties, and the county puts together a report and then they post it on their website. And so in some counties, depending on how their voting equipment operates, depending on how they have their hardened election management system set up, the reports are different. Some of them don't allow them to post each individual reporting unit or municipality as it comes in. Some have to wait until they have the whole municipality or till they have everybody in that county before they can post the results. And so it's really a function of technology in that county and in those municipalities. Each of our municipalities, all 1,850, are allowed to choose the voting equipment that they want to utilize based on equipment that has been federally certified and state certified. And so there's different equipment in use. There's different end election management systems in use on the county side where they receive those results and put them into reports. And so it's really just a function of that and the differences that you'll see from county to county and the systems that they use.
Next, we have some other first-time questions. Jason Calvi.
Meagan, in layman's term, can you explain exactly what canvassing looks like and what is the intent right now of what they're doing? Thank you.
I'll try. So canvassing is, simply put, the triple check on the election process. It's what takes unofficial results and makes them official certified results. So for instance, the municipalities, so each of our cities, towns, and villages, they reconvene the day after the election, and they have to do some initial checks on the system to make sure, for example, that they have the same number of voter numbers as they have voters that were issued a ballot and signed the poll book. So checks like that to make sure that everything adds up. They didn't have some kind of issue, that there wasn't an opportunity for somebody to count ballots twice. They do those checks to make sure all the numbers line up. Once they've done all that, and again, it's publicly observable, anybody can go watch. It doesn't happen often that people come to watch that process, but that happens in the day after the election day. Then from there, and this happened yesterday at 4 o'clock, the municipalities send all their election materials to the counties. So they send the counties their poll books, and they send the counties all the election materials. And the counties do roughly the same. They go through and make sure that everything makes sense. Did the municipality get it right? Did they have the right number of voter numbers issued, the right number of signatures on the poll book? Did they have the right number of ballots cast? Does all of that match? If it doesn't, they can send it back to the municipality and say, you made a mistake. You need to go back and fix this. And so once the county has done their double check, they certify the election in the 72 counties. And then from there, it comes to the state. And we do the same. We go in and check all of the data that they've submitted to us. So we don't get the actual materials. We don't get the poll books and other materials, but we get all the data. And so then we do our final checks on all the data, make sure things line up. Like registered voters. Do we have the right number of registered voters for ballots that were issued? Is there a problem here? Did somebody add an extra 0? Did something go wrong in any of the process? And then once we do our check, we certify. And so that's the Canvas process. I don't know if that was hopefully accessible, but that's the Canvas and the certification process. And that's how results go from unofficial to official certified results.
We've got time for 2 more questions. First is Victor Jacobo, followed by Rose Schmidt.
Hi, Megan. Again, thank you for taking the time. I know you don't want to speculate on what the eventual cost is, but I was wondering if you could walk us through, what is it if a campaign, whoever does it, does request a recount? What are they paying for? Is it the staffing? Is it equipment? What are those costs that the commission traditionally will ask for?
Yeah. So the law has been changed since 2016. We now need to provide estimates for the county's expenses and the state's expenses. So county expenses, that would be things like supplies, as simple as, making sure you've got tables and pens and that you've got the voting equipment, if you're using voting equipment that you need, that you are paying the wages of the staff or the chief inspectors that are coming in to help as part of the process. It could be things like renting a larger space. I know when we processed nomination papers this year, we had to rent a larger space to accomplish social distancing. So things like that are the county's expenses that are included. And we do have a list of those expenses from 2016. And we're looking at that right now to see if there's any adjustments needed on the county side. But it's really staffing and supplies that are needed to conduct the actual recount. The county clerk's time and their staff's time to conduct the recount. And then on the state side, and this is new to us because the law changed, but we can also take a look at staff time. And we don't, get the actual artifacts of our election. So I don't know that we'll need additional things like space, but it's mostly staff time to help advise the local election officials. I know my role in 2016's recount was working with each of the jurisdictions as their recount results and canvases came in, working with them to understand if there was a net change in any of the reporting units and to understand why, what happened, why did the numbers change? And then we would post all of that to our websites every day from all the thousands of reporting units state to make sure that we were being transparent and communicating about that. We also do things like, crunch the data and make sure that as those unofficial results are coming in, that we're keeping everybody in the loop on that as well. So those are the basics of what the cost would be that are associated.
And then Rose Schmidt. Rose, go ahead. Do you need to unmute yourself, Rose? We can't hear you. Maybe she's not there. Alexa, did you have one more question?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay.
I'll lower my hand.
Okay. Rose, are you there? One last chance. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and shoot me more questions if you've got them. I will try my best to answer, but realize that I'm getting like 10 times the normal volume of questions and inquiries. So I will do what I can. Just before this, we sent out a news release with many of the things that Meagan talked about, and all the numbers that she gave are in the press release as well. And then also, one thing we did do is we posted on the website a spreadsheet that has the county by county unofficial numbers that are there for the purpose of calculating the recount margin. And so if you're not an AP member or you don't have access to that as AP data, you can kind of get some of those unofficial numbers from us. Our staff had to go out and gather that information because the counties don't report that to us at this point. So anything else you want to add, Meagan?
No, just thanks everyone. And like Reed said, there's a lot of information on elections.wi.gov. So if the press release doesn't answer your questions, if you go to elections.wi.gov and, put the subject matter in our search box, you'll find a memo or a manual or two.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions for things that are on the website. And especially if you're looking for numbers, look for that link to the statistics section on the left-hand side of the page. And there's all the information about the absentee ballots, about voter registration, all that kind of stuff is there. And on the recount costs, just put in the word recount in the search box. We have a whole page, and it's got all the information from the 2016 recount, as Meagan mentioned. So thank you all for coming, and I will send out a link to this video as soon as Zoom produces it for me. Thanks.
Great, thank you.